Welcome everyone, and thanks for joining today's webinar, Building Bulletproof Housekeeping Workflows for 5-Star Stays. I'm Veronique, I'm the Partnerships Manager here at Escapia, and for our webinar today, we are really excited to be joined by two fantastic longtime industry experts from the vacation rental space, who will share how smarter housekeeping workflows can streamline operations and keep your properties truly guest ready. First, we have Corinne. She's the VP of Community and Engagement at Breezeway, where she connects and empowers vacation rental professionals while also helping drive operational excellence across the hospitality industry. We are also joined by Zara. She is the Director of Operations at Island Time. She oversees day-to-day operations, reservations, as well as revenue strategy for a really diverse portfolio of vacation rentals on Hilton Head Island, and she brings hands-on experience in driving efficiency and quality at scale. Yeah, we're really thrilled to have you both here today, and so I'm handing it over to Corinne to kick us off with the actual webinar.
All right, amazing. Well, this is going to be so fun. Thank you, Vero, for having us. It's always, I get the opportunity to do a lot of these webinars, but it's always really fun to do with someone who I know and call a friend. So, Sarah, I'm so excited to have this conversation with you, and I think it's great timing as we really dig in to folks, many folks, especially in beach markets who are kind of hitting their peak season and their peak stride. So hopefully there'll be some great takeaways that folks can implement into their business. So I think what I will say very quickly for folks who don't know, as Vero said, I'm the VP of Community here at Breezeway. We are a partner of Escapia, and we have been a partner for many years, and love working with everyone. And if you're not familiar with what Breezeway does, we are a smart operations platform. So we focus on guest experience and operations through cleanings, inspections, maintenance. We have a messaging, a guide product, an assist product, all kinds of things to help give your team the opportunity to be more effective in the work that they're doing. And we've had the pleasure of working with Sarah and the team at Island Time for, I want to say, almost 6 years now.
Yeah, I looked it up. Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah, and as Corinne said, I'm very excited to do this with her because we've been working together, as we said, it's 5-6 years. We joined 2021. So
yeah. Okay.
we have been Escapia users since Island Time started 2019 as well. So love both products.
Amazing. Well, we're not going to hold it against you that you went with Escapia before us. We're glad you made it. We're glad you made it and put both of us together. So we can talk a little bit about that more, but I wanted to give a little context as well, just for folks who maybe aren't familiar with Breezeway and what we do, and kind of saying well, why are you on here talking? Sarah is a real star of this webinar because she does what y'all do on a daily basis. And she and her team, really execute some phenomenal properties. So what we're going to cover today, and Sarah, anything else you want to add before we talk about what we're going to cover? Anything else you want to jump in with?
No, I'm just going to kind of give you some ideas of what we do, some experiences that we have. If anyone has questions, let us know. But obviously, every single vacation rental company does things a little bit differently as well. It's all going to depend on your owners, your guests, your market as well. So I'll give some examples of what we do, but it doesn't mean that that's the same fit for every single person.
I feel like that's what's so fun about this industry, right? It's like we all do this. I was talking to some of our newer hires this morning. I said, everybody does the same thing, but they all do it very differently in many instances. And like you said, market is also a really key piece of what differentiates that. I was talking to someone the other day, and they were saying they're still not doing like linens in their properties, right? The guests are still bringing those up. So every market is totally different. So we're going to dig in. We have about 30 minutes to chat with you all today. I think the Q&A is open. The chat is open. So if, as we're talking, there's something that comes up that you want to dig into more, or you have a specific question about, feel free to add that there, and we'll try to hit all of those at the end. But we're going to cover 3 big things to start. We're going to talk about sort of the best frameworks to go ahead and catch issues before your guests actually come in and enter your properties. We're going to talk about setting your team up for success. A lot of that is, impactful to making sure that everything is caught before a guest arrives. And then we're also going to talk a little bit about some of the recurring work from a maintenance perspective that really goes and influences the way that you protect the properties that you guys are all overseeing and managing. And so that's sort of our plan, and we'll probably weave our way around as we go, because we want this to be super conversational. So probably worth just sort of kicking it off, right? The importance of this work that's happening. And we all have been sort of caught up in one thing gets missed, or one thing that somebody knew needed to be done didn't get done, and then that shows up in a review. And so I thought we would sort of talk a little bit about like what are some of the challenges that folks face in this part of the business, and a lot of that is around like time spent coordinating work, right? It's about scheduling and changes to scheduling and day of changes and last minute issues that pop up, whether that's with your staff or your contractors, or whether that's within a property itself. That's a big piece. And I'm curious, Sarah, you guys have been using Breezeway and Escapia for quite a long time now, and so hopefully this has been resolved for you. But I'd love to sort of hear from you, kind of how does that work, or how has that worked or impacted your sort of efficiency in the past?
Of course, I will say before Breezeway, because I was with Island Time before we had Breezeway, it was spreadsheet hell, is basically the only thing to say. Is we had spreadsheets for everything, for arrivals, departures, inspections, guest issues, mileage, follow-up. Like we would put everything into spreadsheets, and then you'd be like, which spreadsheet did I not put it in? Which one do I need to? So with Breezeway, it just makes everything aligned. So everything is in one place to look at, whether it's a guest issue, maintenance, cleaning. It's all there. Even property information obviously is in Breezeway as well. So it just makes us faster, more efficient, saves time. Big thing too in this industry, as we know, turnover is big. So it's one area that we can put everything in. So that has really helped us, especially in Hilton Head Market. Turnover in property management is very large. So being able to look back to see what happened last year at a property, when an owner says, well, my last property manager told me this or did this, we can look back to see the history. So that has been very helpful. And I'd say consistency as well. It's helped us be more consistent when it comes to the checklists, which we'll get into, making sure that things are not missed. Housekeeping was probably one of the hardest things to manage without Breezeway.
Well, and I think, I think the thing that's so funny, and we are all seeing, right? There's so many conversations around AI and AI, how are you adapting and leveraging AI in your business? And I think there's so many really important opportunities, but I think this topic specifically is one that we can have amazing tools to help us. But at the end of the day, housekeeping is really difficult because it requires a human to go in and do the work, and that human to also relay that information. It's not on here, but I know, I think that's, I think when we start to think about that impact, and we're going to talk about it a little bit more about setting your team up for success and making sure that they have the tools that they need. It is about like, making sure that things don't get missed, or like you said, live in 6 different spreadsheets, and then where did I put that and where isn't it right? There's a lot of other stats on here, but I do want to talk a little bit around inspections, because I think that I was just doing a in that same conversation with our new hires today. I was talking about like, people were saying like, well, how often do people inspect properties and who's inspecting them? And we were kind of talking about the different ways that inspections can happen, and the fact that like best practice is to try to get into every home before a guest arrives. But what does that look like for you guys?
Yeah, so we do have 100% inspection rate for all arrivals. So we do have that set up automatically to trigger when there's a reservation to check in. If it's an owner, we actually do 2 inspections. We would have the property manager do the inspection, and then a lead property manager follows up behind them just to make sure nothing was missed. We do departure inspections. We do security inspections. So if a property is vacant for 10 days or more, we are going in there. And all of these are automatically set up to trigger based on something from Escapia, whether it's a check-in, check-out, owner arrival, guest arrival, or vacancy.
Amazing. And I think, on average, what we're seeing is, and a lot of these stats are coming from a survey that we did towards the end of last year. But, 70% of teams try to inspect every property. And so getting that 100% inspection is really great. And I'm sure you see that play out. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in your guest reviews and your guest experience, guest experience stats. So let's talk a little bit about that framework. We're leading right into it on catching issues before the guest arrives. And so Sarah, you talked a little bit about checklists. So I'm going to maybe let you kind of take and talk a little bit about how you guys structure your checklists, and then I can sort of circle back at the end of that.
Yeah, of course. We have all different styles of checklists, whether for our housekeepers, for example, and I've been on a few different panels and talked to different property managers as well. We do ours a little bit different to other property managers just from feedback from our housekeepers. A lot of the housekeepers in our area, they're not that tech savvy. So, or they don't have iPhones, or Androids, whichever. If you're an Android lover, I apologize. But they don't have a smartphone, I should say. So they can't use the app necessarily, or they're not comfortable using the app. Breezeway does have multiple languages, so that is very helpful for our housekeepers as well, that they can do the translation. But a lot of the actual cleaners themselves don't like to use the app, and it is the owners of the company or the managers. So we have really scaled down our housekeeping checklist for them just to let us know if they've cleaned each room, but they do know how to add if there's an issue. So they can put in a wrench, for example, to let us know there's a maintenance issue, and that goes to our property managers. When it comes to our inspections, we do also change our inspections depending on season. In the summer, we're a lot busier, as everyone can guess, at a beach area. So we make our checklist a lot smaller in the sense of there's not as many checkpoints for each bedroom. We will train the staff that in every bathroom, the toilet seat should be up. Like the lid should be up, the seat should be down, instead of everything being up, instead of having that a point on the checklist for someone to do. Because again, it is very time consuming, or can be, especially if you're in an 8-bedroom home, to go through each point for 8 different bathrooms. But we also do property specific points too. For example, I have an owner that is completely obsessed with people smoking at her property, pets at her property, and a bunch of other things. So for the departure checks, we make sure that there are specific things, like we make sure that there was no dog hair on anything in the property. Obviously, that's a given when you do an inspection, but we specifically want it to be there because Breezeway also has the ability for you to print out the report and share the inspection with the owner as well.
Well, and I think to your point, right? I think that's one of the things. So if you, and just for folks, if it isn't clear from what Sarah was saying, they work with contract cleaners, right?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. So contract cleaners, and the cleaners are going in, and then the owner companies are the ones sort of completing that checklist. But I think, you brought up a really important piece, right? Is that there's not a one size fits all. You really do have to talk to the people that you're working with and help them understand, and then figure out what makes sense, right? So for you guys, you go lighter on the housekeeping, and you talked about something that I also want to touch base on, which is that idea of, I'm going to give you a checklist, and this is going to be something you need to confirm you did, or a training piece. And we're going to talk about that in just a minute, because I think there's a really big distinction. And if folks are taking checklists and trying to make those serve as training tools, there can be training checklists, but the one that your team is using every day when you're in a property is not it. So really sort of distinguishing between that and working with your team to understand what makes sense, I think, is super important. And then that photo documentation as well, right? Like that ability to say, no, we did that. I have a client down in the Outer Banks a few years ago that shared with me a story about how they got a call from a guest after arrival complaining about a dirty kitchen. And they were actually able to go back and look at the photos that had been taken at, 3:40 that afternoon, and said, well, the kitchen looks totally fine to me. And immediately that guest dirty kitchen issue was non-existent anymore, right? Because, sometimes as much as we, love our guests that come in, some of them are just looking to find an issue, right? And so having some of that photo documentation not only protects you and gives you the kind of ability to push back on maybe some, things that may come up from the guest side, but it also protects your team, and it serves as a really great way to be confident in the work that's done. So for those folks who aren't inspecting every property, I think photo documentation becomes even more paramount there, because you may not have a second set of eyes and ears who goes in there, but you have those photos that you can go back to.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. The photos definitely help, but even just the checklist itself, everything does help for us to go back to the guest, if there ever is an issue.
And same with like with damage issues that come
Yeah.
up after the fact, right? Like, well, here's a photo of this not damaged on Tuesday when the guest checked in, and here's a photo of it on Saturday when they left. Only person that was in there, not us.
Right.
So again, I think I love that idea of really kind of understanding who your audience is, who's doing the work, and what needs to be done. And we'll talk a little bit more about that training piece, I think, on the next slide. And then the only other thing I want to touch on this slide before we move on, and let me know, Sarah, if there's anything you want to add in here, but I think linking the performance of the team to reviews is also really important, because this kind of goes back to that idea of identifying where there's opportunities to coach and train, and also recognizing continued job well done. And I think we did a state of work report last fall, and we got some incredible feedback that the reason that people do this job is because they want to have an impact on the guest experience. And so the more that you can sort of tie the work that they're doing to that guest experience, the harder, oftentimes we're going to see those folks working then.
Mm-hmm. No, I definitely agree with that. I find with our employees, especially our property managers, they love to see how many tasks they've completed as well. So not just about the checklist, but also the maintenance tasks that they've done, how much revenue that they can make through Breezeway as well. So it's definitely a motivator.
Absolutely. And the impact of, we talk a lot about making sure that your team and the folks who are representing you understand what their work means to the business. And so I think, I think that is super important. We're going to talk a little bit about, we talked a little bit about what you put on your checklist. What is, Sarah, when you guys got started, I'm curious, did you have a really deep, very detailed inspection that you used, or did you guys know right from the start, hey, because we're working with contract cleaners that aren't super tech forward, we want to have a really basic one? Like, what did your checklist look like at the very beginning?
No, at the beginning we went all in, and we had like a really hard, I think we used one of the Breezeway, because Breezeway does have obviously the templates that you can use, and we used one of those, and our housekeepers were like, sorry, this is not going to work. If you expect us to use this one, then we may not be able to do this. Luckily on Hilton Head, though, a number of the companies do use Breezeway, so that's definitely helped us all out. But we then shortened it. Honestly, we sat down. We actually meet with our housekeepers every single season before the summer and after the summer. And that's one thing that we have open communication. So we kind of structured our checklist to make it easier for everybody.
Yeah. Well, speaking of those checklists, there is a QR code on here. Folks who are watching are not Breezeway clients. They don't have this in here. You can actually access and download a full cleaning checklist just to take a look. But I think this is a good spot. We kind of look at some of these items on here. This is not Sarah's checklist, right? This is just an example one here. But I think I think this is probably a really good time to talk about that concept of using a checklist to train versus using a checklist to get things done. And I think, I'd love to sort of hear a little bit about what you guys have done and how you guys have sort of differentiated between the two from a training perspective.
Definitely. And it's very different, because that is feedback, again, we get from some of our property managers. They're like, we're used to just walking around, we follow the wall, we look up, we look down, we don't need a checklist. We need a checklist, and we do change our checklists all the time, not just on seasonality, but also from the guest feedback of things that are missed. Like if people start saying under the beds are dusty, we will add that back into our checklist if it has been removed, because there's some things to some people that are common sense to check
Right.
under the bed, to check every single drawer, to make sure the toilet paper is wrapped and not wrapped. But to other people, it may not. They are looking more for the technological side, excuse me, like the TV's not working, is it plugged in? So there's everyone's different. So we have to make sure that the checklists do encompass everybody. And most importantly, that the guest is taken care of and the property's in the best condition. So generally what we do when we have a new employee, we will walk them through the property on how we want an inspection to be, including all the items that are not necessarily in the checklist. And then we will go through Breezeway with them. So they're not focused, because sometimes you find people are too busy looking at their phone and the checklist over actually looking around the property.
Well, and I think too, you bring up a really good point, right? You're walking them through and you're helping them understand what guest ready means to island time, right? Because I think that, again, it is like your point of, there are different expectations, like, I think this looks great. Now there's someone else is going to look at it and be like, I think that looks awful. Right. And so making sure that everybody understands your sort of brand, oops, I hit the wrong thing. Your brand standards is super important, there. So, okay, let's go on to the next one. See, I was just a little ahead of myself to talk about how you can set your field team up for success. And we've talked and touched on a couple of these things as we've been going on. But I think, 4 ways that we see or we hear from folks about like where things break down before that guest ever arrives is timing. I grew too quickly. I didn't know that this worked last summer. I thought it would work this summer, right? Where's information coming? Where's information being shared? And all those spreadsheets are that you talked about, or the fact that like one person doesn't know, right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing. And so before we dig into these, was there one of these things that you guys, is there any one of these? I'm sure everybody on the call is like, well, I've experienced all of those, but is there one that kind of stands out that you guys had back in the day?
I would say, well, like I said, there's multiple things. I have 2 stories that I can really think of, which Breezeway has saved us. Saturday mornings, for example, I used to come in the morning and I would read all the emails, all the text messages to figure out who had checked out before the 10 o'clock checkout time, and then start texting every single housekeeper saying, this property is checked out. You can get in early, because every guest wants an early check-in, especially on Saturday in the summer. So I would sit here and I'd text all the housekeeping companies. With Breezeway, obviously having that set up, there's an automatic text message that the guest can text to say they've checked out, and then it triggers an alert to not only the housekeeping company but the inspector too. So that has been huge. Another one, again, when it comes to housekeeping, because I do think it helps the most with not just that, but just communication wise and timing. We had a housekeeper on 4th of July weekend, which is the busiest week on Hilton Head. She had some crews that didn't turn up, but she didn't communicate that to me until 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So we had about 20 properties that had not even been touched at that point. So we had to kind of scramble, get other housekeepers involved. If we had Breezeway at the time, I would be able to check to see, have the tasks been started? Have they started their checklist, and kind of know where the housekeeper was before it had got to that point? So.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
20 homes you must have been losing your mind at 3 o'clock on a Saturday.
Just a little bit. And then, of course, we did fire that housekeeping company shortly.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't think that housekeeper still works for you, right?
I was like, you could have called me in the morning and we could have figured this out, but 3 o'clock? No, thank you.
Yeah, that's tough. That's tough to swallow. Because again, at the end of the day, that company, there was there was repercussions for them, but you guys were the ones getting the frustrated guest calls. You guys were the ones that probably got hit with some negative comments and reviews. And we all know, right? Everyone on this call knows that as soon as one thing goes wrong, that whole week, right? I'm just looking for another reason. I'm looking for something else to be mad about, despite being on a beautiful beach in sunny South Carolina. So, okay. So timing. Yes. I think, we all know, I was just reading something on like a chat board somewhere. I'm aging myself when I say a chat board. That might not be what it's actually called, a Facebook group. Maybe that ages me too. I don't know. But I was reading somewhere around about a guest that left late, right? And the impact that just sort of had. And then I was thinking about it as I was prepping for this webinar, and I was thinking like, I'm the person that like always makes my doctor's appointments first thing in the morning. All my appointments, I want to get in before they can run late. Because the later in the day, or flight, whatever it is, the later in the day, the more likely that something has gone wrong. But unfortunately for us, the later in the day, it just means that we're starting a whole new process, right? And that guest who's coming in does not care about what happened before 4 o'clock. They care about 4 o'clock on, because and most of them, like you said, care about it from probably 1, 2.
I was gonna say their check-in time, it could be even 10 o'clock in the morning. They want to get in the property.
Yeah. I have been that guest too, though, so I can't judge them too much. But either way, right? Whatever the time is, it is about the less that you have control, the less that you have visibility, the less that it all lives on one person to know all of that, the harder it becomes to be effective, and also then to set your teams up for success. Because what probably happened on that Saturday when you had the 20 homes is that you're calling in a bunch of your other people saying, hey, can you do this? And that just makes for a tough thing for everyone to sort of go through. And then the other one that I want to talk about, because we're going to talk about in the next slide too, is about not having one way that all of the information gets sort of reported back or shared or collected, right? So often I'm talking to people and it's like, well, some people will just call us, some people will text, some people will, bring in a paper that they wrote everything down on, right? That becomes so difficult to sort of manage, because it really does only take one thing to have that. So I think when we start to think about building a coordinated system, what is our communication protocol, right? Pick a channel and stick with it. It doesn't have to be Breezeway. We would love it if it was Breezeway. But when you're thinking about your business, pick one channel, and that's how everybody communicates. It may make sense for you to think about how you segment your audience, right? Who's seeing what messages? We just recently launched in our messaging product the ability to have team and owner and guest conversations all living within the same inbox, but within the same area, but within different inboxes, right? So you can have the right people sort of responding to and managing those conversations so that they're not all mixed in, because that creates, it's the last bullet on here, but it creates a lot of difficulty when there's routine, hey, can I, how do I, where is, versus there's no hot water, right? And so when everything's sort of mixed in, especially on those busy turnover days, that becomes incredibly important to have very standardized processes that you're sort of following.
Yep.
Also standards. We talked about this a little bit, right? You want to design for the new hire. You talked about how you guys have your training process to follow the wall. I love that. That brings up a lot of past conversations and VRHP sessions where folks would come in and learn what that meant. And if anybody doesn't know what that means, let us know in the chat, and I'll have Sarah share it with you. But that's a great way. But you want to make sure that anybody who comes in and is operating and working on your behalf can operate at your standards. You want to make sure, right, that they understand what needs to be done and why that's important. We talked about reference photos earlier. A story I will share on that is we had another client. They were in, I think, Georgia maybe, and they said, I don't think the cleaners are actually taking pictures, and they'd had a stretch of pure rain, and all the photos that the people were submitting were photos that they had stored on their camera, sunny days, and it was beautiful. And so use reference photos so that you can know and have your team actually share the work that they're doing, but also that you can share photos with them so that they know what getting things done right is and how it should look and what that is. That difference in what makes what is good versus not good can be eliminated pretty easily when they understand what they're going to need to do. And then I think, it sounds like, Sarah, you guys did this, right? You went through with your cleaners at the very beginning and you heard the feedback and you made some adjustments, right? So test it, go through what that looks like, how that's going to play out in real life, right? On paper, it could be one thing, but in real life, totally different. And then adjust from there to make sure that it operates and meets your business's needs.
And we change ours all the time. So, from guest reviews, from seasonality, from things that have been missed, just changes in standards that we have as well. We make changes all the time to it. So you can always readjust your checklists.
Yeah. And I think, the last one on here, which I think is really important too, is figuring out and understanding when do things need to be, outside of adjusting your checklist, when else do things need to be adjusted, right? Add additional buffers, change the types of cleans that may be done, but put in some logic that can handle those edge cases so that it's not requiring an individual person to go in and make those changes manually.
That saves so much time, I will add. So much time.
Yeah, amazing. Okay, good. And then you guys, I know you do a really good job of this. You rely very heavily on vendors and contract partners, but build the list of people that you're going to work with before you need them, right? That Saturday, if you hadn't had a really great kind of bench of folks who you could call in to help with those cleans, you probably would have been in a very different situation.
Yes, definitely. You need to know who are your people who can work on the Saturdays, especially. Generally, we don't work with any vendors who are not available to us on Saturdays and to a certain time as well. It has to be obviously a couple of hours after check-in time too, because that's when guests generally find all the issues for emergencies.
Of course it is at 3 o'clock, right before they come in.
Usually it's 5. It's
Yeah,
usually
5. Define the path, right? I always say the best laid plan. Well, I don't always say this. I think a lot of people say this, but the best laid plan, something's going to go wrong. No matter how much process you put in, no matter how well you think you've got it, something is going to go wrong. So know, who am I calling for what? What is that going to look like? It's all documented. You want to make sure that you understand what was happening. It's not only going to protect you, but it also gives your owners confidence in what you're doing to protect their home, right? I remember a manager down in Florida saying to me once, like, there's nothing worse than when an owner comes to me and says, haven't we fixed this dishwasher 3 times in the last 2 months? And I had to be like, have we? Like, everybody has been there. So document it, look back, understand what's going on, and use some of that data to help make good decisions for moving forward.
Yeah, I'll also say it's great for even myself, director of operations and higher up managers who aren't in the field, because when an owner's disgruntled or upset, they come to us and ask us questions that we may not know. So going into Breezeway and being able to look at the past history, we can pull it up really fast to be like, oh yes, I do know they were in your property last week and this happened.
Yeah. And I think this is sort of taking a different lens on this. And this is more about like, okay, when something does go wrong, how are you going to acquiesce the guest, right? Because we've talked about having the vendors, defining the escalation, knowing and documenting everything. But you've still got to have that conversation with the guests. So in this scenario, right, we're talking about HVAC or plumbing. But I think, you want to make sure that there's that brand standard, because whenever something goes wrong, that's when those guests get more frustrated. And so have standard templates that your whole team can use to communicate about things that are going to impact the guest stay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we got a little chatty here, so we're pretty much at time. So we'll go through these last slides really quickly. I appreciate everybody staying on. I want to just talk a little bit about the difference between what you should do every stay versus what you should do seasonally, monthly, annually. And Sarah, maybe I'll just sort of have you share a little bit around what you guys are doing as an example.
Yeah, these are perfect. Obviously, they're worded different for different markets that you're in. Like, we don't call it for seasonal, we don't call it weatherproof. We call it I cannot talk. I'm sorry. Storm prep is the big thing for us. So we do storm prep, freeze prep, and we have different templates built in. It's not necessarily triggered based on anything. It's just if there's a storm coming, we're going to use the storm prep template. But there's different things that we will have, like annuals is a perfect example. Every year you do an annual review of the property, go through, count everything, also make sure all the appliances are up to date. Does anything need to be replaced? The example of the smoke and CO2 detectors is obviously perfect. Fire extinguishers can be added into that. So you can combine it too to make like a safety checklist if you needed to. Mm-hmm. But it is great that you can have it set up for, depending on stay, vacancies, as I mentioned, monthly, seasonal, and annual. You can set up however you wish, and reoccurring as well.
Yeah. And I would just add, the only thing I would add to that, right, is if you're looking at something on here and you're saying like, oh, well, we do this when a guest lets us know that it's an issue. We got to change that, right? We have to be preventative. We have to be doing preventative work. We can't do the reactive work. There's a huge impact to your business. to the guest experience, to our industry as a whole, costs you money. And so think about, what you're doing from a preventative perspective, because you want to be able to easily take care of those homes and let your owners know what you're doing on a regular basis. So I think the biggest thing here is, we talked about this a little bit, that owner who knows more about what you're doing in a property than what you seem to know when you're on the phone with them is not what we want to have happen. We want your team to be well equipped with a full history, to know what's going on, to be able to easily identify what needs to be upgraded and to have those conversations, and also to know what needs to be done from an inventory perspective on items that you may need to stock.
Yeah, and with different checklists as well, you can set it based on your owner, because every owner is different. Like, we have investor owners, you have the generational owners, the owners that think they can fix everything themselves and don't want to pay for anything, or the owners who don't care and let you fix everything. So it's a good and easy way for us to keep everything aligned and know how to deal with these owners too.
And also to then, like you said, like, share that information with them if they care. I know we at Breezeway, we just pulled out some new owner approval tools and owner reporting tools that really allows you guys to continue to showcase what you're doing on a regular basis to those folks without having to manually create reports on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, and just give them the confidence. But I think, Sarah, like you said, not every owner wants that.
No, not everyone does. So that's why it's good that we can individualize everything.
Absolutely. Okay, so we're going to do key takeaways, standardized property specific checklist items that your team can implement in the field. We talked loosely about scheduling earlier, but I think auto assigning and managing your team communication in one platform really helps with that overhead coordination time. And then thinking about how you can do recurring preventative maintenance to have more transparency in the work that you're doing. I don't know. I haven't been looking at the chat or the Q&A if there's any questions that have come in.
Yes, there's two actually. So there's one asking if, for example, Spanish is an option for non-speaking or reading English users. I think you answered that before that. There's multiple languages available, right?
Yeah, we have full translation of the Breezeway mobile app in 10 languages. Spanish is one of them. And then we have translation of like the requirements of what needs to be done in way more. I don't even know what that number is, but yes, 10 full languages.
Okay. And then there's a second question regarding the API integration between Escapia and Breezeway, and if there is like plans to improve that. I can take this one. So as we speak, our teams have met a few times, the Escapia and Breezeway product teams got together, are aware of this being an issue, and are actively exploring how we can not only improve the API integration itself, but also to make, the experience for the users more smooth. So I don't want to say yes or no here, but we are actively working on, making the experience much better. So hopefully there's going to be like some change soon.
I'm gonna say thank you for taking that, because I personally have not been part of that conversation, so I would have said I don't know, but we can check. So that's great to hear. I know, listen, the beauty about partnerships is that, we're both really focused on like creating the best experiences for our clients. And so the more that you can share what makes you able to have that and what would impact that, the better. So I'm really excited to hear, and not surprised.
Actively working on, making lives easier.
Love that. Yeah, I'm not surprised by that. So
I love that too. Thank you. And I will say, as a user of both, and being on panels with both Escapia and Breezeway for beta testing and things, you both are very, very good at listening to your partners. So appreciate that.
That's, you guys are the ones using it every day, right?
Yeah.
Like, where there's opportunities and ways that we can improve everything. So I appreciate you guys always sharing. Sarah, I also appreciate you. You just come off of a crazy busy stretch. And I saw there's another Hilton head manager on here. You also came off of a crazy busy stretch.
Hi, Travis.
Yeah. Shout out to Travis. But so I really appreciate you making time to join us and to share your experiences. And I hope that everybody on the call was able to kind of think about how they're doing things in their business and potentially make some small tweaks, right? The thing about this work is that it's often not huge overhauls. Mm-hmm. It's just small incremental improvements that just make everything sort of flow a little better. And so, Sarah, I'll say to you, any parting words, anything that we want to, anything that we want to end with that you want to share with folks?
I would just say anyone who's obviously using this or new to Breezeway, or even have been using it for many years, make changes. Everything doesn't have to be stuck the same. People change, guests change, employees change. So just make those changes, and nothing is ever exact. Nothing is ever 100%. So there's no right or wrong at the same time. So just go with the flow.
I love that. And good luck this summer.
Thank you.
May no cleaners call you at 3 p.m. and tell you they didn't touch a property, but now you would know. Now
right. I was gonna say now I would know, and also I don't think they would do that to us now.